This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of NCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 189. Nick Max and Noah Grant here in the den after a week off hiatus, so to speak. There was a hiatus actually for both Husky squads, men and women respectively, over the past 2 weeks. It was staggered as such. So we're back in action here, actually recording on my birthday, Sunday, December 3rd here. Show release maybe probably closer to Tuesday on the 5th when folks are hearing this, meaning the women will be in action against Minnesota this upcoming week. So a lot of really great hockey to talk about. Pretty much essentially, if you want to be technical about it, Big 10 foes in some senses, even though, of course, the women's side is still the WCHA for the time being. So, but some really good hockey that we got to discuss, and we're going to jump right into it. Center Ice View News and Notes presented by HuskiesIllustrated.com and the Soda Pod. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com. Welcome in episode 189 here in the den. Nick Maxon, Noah Grant here to get you caught up on all things Huskies hockey, NCHC, WCHA. Nick, first of all, I guess before we jump into that, of course, you were gone on a little bit of a mini vacation, among other things. Yeah. And of course, I had Thanksgiving off last week. So first of all, safe travels, I'm hoping, and everything going well. A little bit warmer probably where you were headed, although it's been unseasonably warm, I would say, this winter compared to others so far in the Midwest. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, whatever you want to say about that.
Yeah, but I'm also not going to let you get away with the fact that you open up the show saying, hey, it's my birthday, and you're not going to get any crap for it. So welcome to the club, bro, meaning you're old as hell.
Yeah, well, one of us has a walker and it ain't me, so
you're not that far away now anymore. So don't count your blessings there, Chief. No, happy birthday though. Honestly,
thank you.
It was a special day. Hopefully you have at least, I know, worked a little bit, but hopefully you're at least going to relax a little bit, enjoy it.
Yeah, I mean, it won't be bad. I work tonight and tomorrow, and then by the time the show comes out, I actually am off for 12 of the following 15. So it's actually not too bad. We're almost there. And I think the thing that's most exciting, of course, is, I mean, like you said, I'm going to work tonight, but actually all my coworkers found out, and they're all bringing food and cake and stuff like that. So that's always exciting, to feel a little bit appreciated, I think in that moment. So, I mean, I didn't get a cake from you, so I don't know what to say about that. So
it's in the mail. Don't worry. I think here's the big question. Excuse me. My voice is a little rusty coming back from a very early flight from the East Coast this morning. Up in Minot, there's got to be great steakhouse choices like Pizza Ranch and Applebee's to celebrate your birthday dinner. So
it's actually the gal pal's taking me out to Longhorn, which is I'm pretty excited about that.
That's a Darden concept too. For those who don't know, Darden is the same company that does Olive Garden and Bahama Breeze. A couple other little neat concepts. You used to actually have Red Lobster in that brand too, but
I was told Olive Garden from somebody that works with us. They said it's a very Midwestern thing. I don't know how true that is, but
it's not. No, Olive Garden it's a national concept. I think what they probably meant is that in certain parts of the country, like anything else, let's just say maybe some concepts are more frequented in other regions than others. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. Well, speaking of a quote unquote national concept, by the way, why don't we talk about women's hockey? Of course, past 2 weeks here, the Huskies were off over Thanksgiving break and then back in action against Ohio State. And remember when we said this team, had a chance to make a statement against some of the big dogs this season? Well, we'll get to that. First of all, going all the way back to the holiday break, Friday, November 4th through Sunday, November 26th, Minnesota ended up beating Harvard on Friday. St. Thomas subsequently lost to them on Saturday. So a bit of some holiday tournaments going on here. Ohio State beating St. Lawrence 11-0 and then 5-1 Friday, Saturday, respectively. Minnesota Duluth beating Colgate the first night 3-0 and then tying 1-1. That Colgate team is not half bad coming from the East Coast this season. Minnesota then beating Cornell the first night 5-1. Cornell beat St. Thomas actually the night before, I should say 4-1. So it's kind of hard to recap a lot of the scores, I feel like, sometimes for the holiday weekend. And then the only other team that was in action was Saturday, Sunday, Mankato, winning both of their games 5-1 and 7-2 against Robert Morris and BU. That one was in Tennessee. So congrats to them. The Smash Showcase, they pretty much were the best team in that one. Moving on to this upcoming weekend, Nick, Mankato continued to roll a little bit. 7-1 and 3-1 were the victories for them against the St. Thomas squad that just has not been on the right side of hockey games so far. And Mankato is starting to heat up a little bit. I feel like this is a team that is starting to kind of find their footing a little bit. I'm not saying they're a great hockey team. I'm not going to go that far yet. And I think it's safe to say that they're still a stretch away from, them. Bemidji, St. Thomas are still a stretch away from the other 5 teams in the WCHA, but they're not a team to be discounted right now. They're a group that's a bit more of a challenge, I think, to handle. And of course, that is WCHA hockey, but there is some sort of a parity discrepancy right now between some of the teams. And, if you're a Huskies fan, there's 3 teams mentioned in that grouping that aren't on par with the other 5 most nights. The Huskies are not one of them anymore, and I think that's really exciting. So we'll get to them in a second. The Gophers winning both of their games against Bemidji State, combined aggregate score 18-3 on the weekend. Pretty much was what it was. Wisconsin beating Duluth 3-0 on Saturday, and then they played at 3:00 today. So I wonder if we can try to rustle up some stats real quick on that one. Let me see if I can pull up Sidearm, and I would imagine that game would be somewhat close, just kind of judging by, the games that they played. There's actually 3-2 Duluth. Duluth, I think, ended up winning this hockey game. From what I can see, 3-2 is the final score. So the Bulldogs get one back. Like I said, this is a team that is really feisty in the WCHA. So something to kind of keep an eye on here, Nick. So the standings are going to update accordingly. We'll get to those in a second. But I think the big story, despite losing 6-2 on Saturday, St. Cloud State beat arguably a top 2 team in the country on Friday. 2-1 was the final score. The Huskies do beat Ohio State, despite the fact that they were outshot 47-17 in this one, and only won 18 faceoffs and lost 43. There is no doubt about it. This Ohio State team is good. But we talked about how special teams has been a bolster to this women's program this season. They've looked good on both sides of it. Perfect 3-for-3 on the penalty kill on Friday night, 2-for-3 on the power play. They were actually down 1-0 after the first. McKenna Webster scoring for Ohio State in 4-on-4 action, but Cece Bolby and Greta Henderson with her first on the power play at the 9:40 and 15:37 mark of the middle frame. Katie Kaufman, Clara Hilmarova, Laura Zimmerman, Taylor Larson all had assists there, and Sonia Hola stopped 46 of 47 for the Huskies to get some crucial points in the WCHA and really bolster their stock heading into the rest of the season. Nick, this in front of a crowd of just under 500 at OSU Ice Arena. I mean, we talked about some of the progress the Huskies have made last year. That big game, they win 1-0 against the Badgers at the Kohl Center in front of just under 15,000. I mean, this is a big deal. This Ohio State team took care of business against an unbeaten Badger squad a couple of weekends ago. The Huskies take points away from them. What a great building block, despite, we'll talk about Saturday's game, but I mean, you improved to 12-4 after that Friday game against one of the best opponents in the country. You got to feel good about that.
You have to. And of course, my time to talk is where all the rust comes in. But, when you talk about a program that is, trying to get back to, shall we say, WCHA relevance, you have to be able to find ways, albeit the stats are not fantastic. I think Brian Idalski would be the first one to say, hey, getting outshot by that margin is not great. But he would lament and say, hey, PK was great. Your goaltending held you in the contest, and you were opportunistic on your opportunities on the power play, right? So at the end of it, sometimes ugly hockey can steal you a game. I think Idalski would probably admit that was not a game that he probably felt like they earned, maybe stole. But at the end of the day, these are the contests that propel you to get some confidence further down the road, because as we know in this league and in this conference, it doesn't get any easier down the stretch, especially after the holiday break. Huskies, even with, I believe, the Duluth points today, would still technically hold the tiebreaker because of games played. But they have a very busy week coming up. So for St. Cloud, again, we'll talk more in depth on Saturday. And obviously OSU made some adjustments, but I think St. Cloud has to feel good, like you mentioned, to take at least one of two from the best team in the WCHA right now. That is the Ohio State Buckeyes. But definitely, certainly some learning opportunities as well, as we'll talk on Saturday's game where they took the split.
Well, think about this. I mean, 11-1 in WCHA play, 14-2. They're one of only two teams in the season and only one in conference to beat Ohio State this season. Only 19 goals given up in conference play, 25 overall for the Buckeyes, and St. Cloud gets the job done. I mean, it's an impressive showing. As you mentioned, you are exactly correct. St. Cloud does occupy the 4th spot at 21 points. Duluth would now move to 20 points on the season. So they're right neck and neck with the Huskies. Ohio State is atop the heap with 31 points. You talk about how big that Bulldogs victory is for tightening things up, by the way. Wisconsin would have liked that victory. They trail Minnesota, although tied on points, both at 28. That would have put them 1 point shy of the Buckeyes. In terms of a victory that would have gotten them right there. So things certainly kind of heating up in the WCHA. It's been a very weird kind of ebb and flow where it's like we feel like we're going to get some of the separation, and then bam, you get a couple of weekends where all these teams are taking points from each other, and then the top 5 are really kind of close. Duluth, like we mentioned, will now creep into 20-point territory, so they'll round out the top 5. And then Mankato, with their victories at 9 points, in relatively good possession of 6th right now. Bemidji State, their lone victory has them with 3 points, and poor St. Thomas, unfortunately, no wins in 12 tries in the WCHA, and it hasn't been for lack of trying. A lot of their losses have been 1-2-goal losses. I mean, they've been in hockey games, and it's just, it's really been tough sledding for them. Speaking of tough sledding, well, the Buckeyes did what the Buckeyes do. They responded very well. Shot margins about the same, 43-16 on that second night. Attendance of just under 700. Both teams 1 for 3 on the power play, which I still think if you look at special teams, if you're the Huskies, you have to feel good about where you were at over the course of the weekend. You were once again 22 for 55 in the faceoff dot. So again, very good hockey team doing well in terms of face-off groupings. It was actually 1-1 after the first. Kayla Barnes gets on the board for Ohio State. Laura Zimmerman responds for the Huskies, her 3rd of the season, from Maddie Peterson and Taylor Larson at the 13:25 mark. But then it was all Ohio State in the middle frame. 4 goals for them in the span of just over or just under, I would say, 10 minutes. And suddenly this game was wide open. Joy Dunn adds a 3rd halfway through period number 3, and Taylor Lind tacks on essentially a goal in garbage time, so to speak, for the Huskies. Her 2nd of the season on the power play. Would be nice to, I know she's battled some injury stuff, but get her rolling again too. She scores on the man advantage. Katie Kaufman, Clara Himlerova, more assists on the weekend. A very good weekend for both of them. JoJo Chobak stopping 37 of the total 43 that she saw, which is, again, no slouch against a good Ohio State team that certainly found a way to adjust, like you mentioned in the second night, Nick. But, as you kind of pull out of, the positives for this weekend, this team improves to 12-5 over the course of the weekend, 7-4 in WCHA play. They face a Gopher squad coming up at 6:00 Central this Tuesday. Yep. And then they're also at home against Duluth to round out their first half of the season. Then it's holiday break time, 6:00 Central, 3:00 Central, Friday, Saturday, respectively, if you're looking to go to either of those games in the Granite City. But Nick, if you want to be technical, the worst the Huskies can finish after this week would be 12-8 on the season and exactly 500, 7-7 in WCHA play, which, I think would kind of overshadow what has already been a very good first half. If that were the case, I think you'd like to see the Huskies take at least one, if not two or three, this upcoming week. They have the ability to do that. They showed that last Friday. But we talked about the growth of this program. Very pivotal games coming up against Duluth, which we'll get to, but it's been mighty impressive. We thought we were going to see maybe the breakthrough a little bit against Wisconsin a couple weeks ago. We had to wait a holiday and change for it, but what a showing on Friday night against Ohio State in a game that you were probably outshot, a little outplayed, if we're being honest. But those are the games that you have to win come playoff time. It doesn't matter how you do it. You have to find a way. Great goaltending performance. And overall, if you're the Huskies, a pretty good building block heading into the month of December.
Then you mentioned what's coming up. I'll be at all three of those games this week coming up. And you talk about how big of a game that was today for Duluth. Yeah. How about it is for Minnesota too, coming up now on Tuesday. If the Huskies win on Tuesday, imagine how close those standings could get. And it's in Cloud. You can't count them out now. Takes two away from UMD. Granted, the history between these two squads have favored the Bulldogs as of recent history. But if you find a way to take them both, you've catapulted yourself into a potential top three position. If not, at the very worst, you're cementing yourself in a top four position, which was something that you and I had talked about during the preseason, knowing that was sort of a goal that, would be nice for them to achieve, to sort of get into that spot, have a home ice position for the WCHA conference playoffs. If you are in that spot, 4 or 5, I think we can comfortably say they're going to be in one of those two positions come holiday break. I think you're happy with the first half. No, granted, you want a little bit more, obviously, but I think where the Huskies are right and the opportunity that presents itself this week, I think you have to be happy with what you have and what you have accomplished so far. But you do now with the short turnaround, you hope they take some lessons learned from this Ohio State team, because if there's one thing that we've noticed, right, is that the Huskies, and this is true against Wisconsin, this is true against Ohio State. We've seen this is where Friday they find a way to slow things down. They find a way to really sort of take a chokehold on the offense of these really predominantly great scoring teams, and they find a way to maybe sneak out a win half the time. Then on Saturday, these teams adjust. They find ways to open things up, and then the scores unfortunately go the other way of the opponent. So I do wonder what's next in that building block for Idalski's squad. I think we might have a good look into what adjustments they might make against Minnesota here coming up in just about 48 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually looking at the standings, it's actually Duluth will have 21 points. I thought that one was in overtime. It wasn't regulation. So they'll be neck and neck with the Huskies entering the week. Minnesota, Wisconsin deadlocked at 28. So, if you want to be theoretical, if St. Cloud has a really great week, they could actually vault into second place if Wisconsin somehow didn't win their games this weekend, I think. But, they could at least get into third place, like you mentioned. Subsequently, the Gophers could pull away from them even more, and Duluth could have, what would be a 6-point spread.
Correct. Heading
into the holiday week. There's a lot of things. The Gophers game is going to be what it's going to be. I think that team is very beatable down, in Minnesota. Of course, they're coming up to the Granite City this upcoming week. that Bulldogs team is beatable too, but I think when you look at that series, you would like to be at least 500. If you can take care of business on Friday, I think you'd feel a lot better about the weekend, knowing that the worst you're going to be is deadlocked neck and neck with them, likely, unless there's some overtime finishes there. So there's a lot of opportunity for the Huskies this weekend. I think if you're Brian Idalski and company, you have to relish that. I know it's a tough week. You come back from Ohio State, you turn right around, you're playing against the Gophers, and then you're playing Duluth, three really great opponents. This will certainly be an interesting test for them. On top of that, though, I mean, you've got 3 games, and then it's the holiday break. You've got to kind of empty the tank a little bit here. You've got an opportunity to do that, and then you have a somewhat favorable schedule coming out of the holiday break, Mankato and St. Thomas to start off before Ohio State at the end of the month of January. But there's opportunity here. The players that we've expected to lead have let Clara Himlerova paces the group, 14 points on the season. Katie Kaufman, impressive year for her so far, 12 points on the year. Alice Surreal, Cece Bowlby, Ella Onick, Emma Gentry round out your 9 and 8 point scores respectively. But I think the thing that's interesting, Nick, I mean, you go down into, you've got obviously the goaltenders are the 3 that are listed, and Jaden Britt, who's only played 3 hockey games, but everybody else has been a somewhat consistent mainstay in this lineup. Only the bottom 3 have less than 3 points. And one of them, of course, is a defenseman. One is a freshman. And Greta Henderson, with only 2 points on the season, picked a very great time for her first as a Husky. So when you look at the scoring spread of this group, I think that's something that's most encouraging, is that you've got a group that, you've got production up and down the lineup. And we say that all the time. It almost sounds, cliche, rhetorical, whatever you want to make it. But when you're looking at the middle of this grouping and you've got players 7, 7, 7, 6, 6, 4, 4, 4 points, like everybody's contributing up and down the lineup. Does that not speak to Brian Idalski's and Janelle Sergey's kind of message and plan, is that, we're not going to be a team that's going to have 7 grade A talents that are going to come in. Every line's going to have a superstar standout, so to speak, that can take a hockey game on its head, like your Ohio States, like your Wisconsins. It is truly win by committee. And this team is, let's not sugarcoat it, they're a deep hockey team compared to where they've been and where they're going.
Yeah, and I think if Idalski was an honest man, right, he would say that, in terms of attracting that elite talent, it's a tough go. Just because you have the perennial programs, like you mentioned before, that just have the resources / the, shall we say that the name brand, if you want to call it, to attract those names. In fact, Idalski had mentioned before the season that with their success last year, he thought that there would maybe be some heads that have turned, maybe just some, shall we say, prospective students. And it wasn't quite as, shall we say, the exclamation point that he thought it was going to be. But with that being said, you hit it on the head. Idalski knows that he has to win by rolling 4 lines. We've watched this team for a number of years now, and we've lamented when we've had a good first line and then an injury takes place, and then all of a sudden we're looking for, hey, where is the scoring going to come from, right? This team has depth, it has ability, and it's playing a style of play that is, shall we say, neck and neck with these other schools, right? So their identity is different, their makeup is different, their style of play is different. The chances of this team making an impact, not only now in the regular season, but in the postseason, is different. And that's a great thing. But as we come into this very heavy, short week, again, 2 games the last 2 days, you get essentially today and tomorrow, and then it's game prep again. You get 2 days, and then it's another 2 games. You do get a break, like you mentioned, but, this is the test. This is the test for this squad. Can they prove that this is a team that can handle whatever adversity, albeit the schedule, and can they take on these top opponents that for the Gophers, they've seen already? So what lessons have they learned from the last time I saw them about a month ago? And 2, can they at least for the standings wise, can they take on a Minnesota Duluth squad that is maybe very close, and can they take care of business against a squad that maybe they feel like they can? So it's going to be a very telling week for this Husky squad to know just where they think they're headed and where they think their game is at, because after this weekend, there's going to be about 4 weeks of rest and good sort of recap before the second half gauntlet gets underway. So I'm excited to watch it, but as you mentioned, this team is built to do more damage than we've seen in years past. We've already seen snippets of it. The question is, can we start now, kind of linking it up together week in and week out?
Yeah, and you talk about, what lessons have they learned from the Gophers? The only team to beat them in a 1-goal contest this season. Huskies have been on the right side the other 3 times they played. As you mentioned, if you take Ohio State into account, the Huskies playing pairwise the number 1, number 2, and number 6 team in the country on the women's side. Huskies vault to number 8 in the pairwise. They are in an NCAA spot right now.
They are,
according to the grouping here. Of course, they entered the upcoming weekend in 10, according to the coaches' polls, and imagine that changes maybe slightly. I would say maybe 9 or 8 is probably fair at this particular point.
Yep.
But again, we talked about it. Obviously, a very pivotal week for this program. Sonia Hola continues to do her thing in net. She's played 8 contests, 7-1 on the season, 0.75 goals against, and a 9.66 JoJo Chobak, and 9.32 with a 1.69 GAA. This team as well, other statistics, they've only lost 1 time when getting on the board first, and when they've led after periods 1 and 2 respectively, they're 7-0 and 10-0. And when they're tied, they're 4-3 and 2-1. So if you don't get on this Huskies team early, and we talked about the success that Ohio State had in the middle frame, they get 4 goals in the span of 10 minutes, and that was the difference maker on Saturday. Yep. This team is good. You look at 43 goals for, 24 goals against. The margin has closed significantly in the middle period now, 12-10 for the Huskies, but 15-9 in the first. St. Cloud has the slight edge, and then 16-5 in the third period. They're taking care of business as games continue to evolve, but their starts have also been good. They're a good hockey team right now. The middle period seems to be where they swoon a little bit. The period of the long change. So something to kind of keep an eye on there. They're out shooting their opponents by 75 positive in the aggregate. Power play of just under 22% and a PK of just over 86%, both very serviceable numbers. As that all culminates to a 12-5 record, 7-4 in WCHA play, and a 706 pairwise points percentage. And they've only lost twice at home, 3 times on the road, 5 wins respectively in each location, and then 2-0 in their neutral site tournament games for over the course of the Icebreaker tournament. So, Nick, good building blocks. I think maybe Saturday leaves a little bit to be desired, just because that game kind of got away from you in the span of about 10 minutes. But you'll take being 500 against Ohio State. I think, if anything, I guess my final sounding board before we go over to the men, Nick, is you mentioned, let's see if they can get a game that it will at least go to overtime. Right now it's, okay, they could maybe take care of their opponent in 2 games if they play well. It's not a question of can they get lucky and win a hockey game. It's how do they control the pace? How will they do this playoff season? They need to take care of business in the second half, but heading into the final week of the first half of the season, calendar year of 2023, certainly some exciting things coming from this Huskies group on the women's side.
Certainly is. And we talked about how with the talent that they brought in, that this team may have a different look to it. We've seen that this team is scoring. They're scoring a lot more. Are they in that upper echelon? No, not quite. But they're definitely scoring at a pace that we have not seen in this program for a very long time. The way that they create chances, the way that, we watch this team play, coming into the zone with layers, the defensemen are active and involved in either the rush plays or certainly in the cycle play in the offensive zone. And it's encouraged, and probably from Idelsky standards, probably a requisite that you have to contribute offensively from the defensive position, right? All those things, when you combine what we've seen before, gives me a lot of hope and promise for this Husky squad to be able to the rest of this season. And more so, can they hold onto a home ice position. How fun would it be to where it, mid-February, I believe, where the WCHA playoffs is a home, thing. And granted, it'd be better if they also could win a series.
Yeah.
But how fun would it be and how good of a statement for this program for Idalski in just under 2 years to take a team that combined how many wins? Not many for the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, think about it. If you take what's going to end up being this season and the previous season, Nick, if you put both of those together, the win counts, that probably surpasses the last 5 or 6 years previous combined. Yeah.
And, to me, though, it's still when I go back to my statement about Idalski and the exclamation point, like, hey, we're here. Meaning the St. Cloud State women's hockey is a team that is competitive, that is going to attract hopefully some more local, maybe higher end talent. And if not that, for sure, with what he already has done with the transfer portal, I think he's going to be able to utilize that even more. Maybe some more high end talent coming his way as well. So this is very exciting for this squad, and I would love to see the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center with this squad with a home WCHA playoff type series. And God forbid if they were able to pull one off, how awesome that would be. And there's a lot of things they're doing well. There's certainly things like the second periods that they're going to have to try to figure out to, maybe better puck management in those situations, maybe is the better term for it. But if they can make some adjustments here and there and then just continue to play the Brian Idalski way, this team is looking very, very good right now, and it's been a joy to watch so far.
Yeah, and of course, the holiday break coming up. It'd be really nice to have Brian on, maybe on the show this upcoming, of course, because the women's team off next week, and then they'll be off until essentially the start of January. Maybe we can do something fun with that. Maybe we'll have to work on it. So it'll be a lot of fun. I think he is one of the few, I guess, in staffing that is not a Huskies Warming House podcast guest. That's also something I think we need to change that pretty quickly. But nonetheless, a team in which we've had a guest on plenty. That's Brett Larson's St. Cloud State Huskies on the men's side. Let's kind of get back into what happened in the past couple of weeks. National score wise, we're probably not going to get into a lot there because it's 2 weeks to recap and a lot of holiday games, but some really interesting scores that I think are important to, pay attention to. The big kind of takeaway here is everybody's beating up on everybody. That's just kind of what it comes down to. I mean, the Big Ten's beating up on each other. Hockey East is having its own thing. The ECAC is slightly down this year, but they're still giving some interesting games. The NCHC, we've talked about that, and interconference matchups have been anybody's guess. We've had wild finishes all the way across here. But as far as NCHC conference play, Nick, again, enough here to keep you interested, I think is probably the easy way to put that. Like we mentioned, the game that we recap previously to the previously, Omaha did win that rescheduled game 4-3 against Denver coming out of Sunday, November 19th. That vaulted us into the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. On Friday, Western Michigan beat St. Lawrence, and they did so again on Saturday. Miami lost in overtime to Mercyhurst, kind of a tough showing for them. But they did redeem themselves on Sunday the 26th. 2-0 was the final for them. North Dakota winning in overtime against Bemidji State. You know what, Nick? And it's interesting. And then they win 5-0 the second night. This Bemidji State team is not a team to be counted out either. I think they're going to be kind of a feisty little team in the CCHA in terms of their playoff picture. They're not an overly strong hockey team, but they've always played the same way, that blue collar, gritty, slightly defensive style, and it can frustrate teams at times. We saw that a couple of years ago.
This year, I'll tell you that much. That's not a team that's playing defense. I'll say that.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's, they're a team that they've given a couple of groups fits this season. They did it a couple of years ago against Wisconsin and the NCAAs, but North Dakota, not a bad hockey team. So I mean, certainly a decent little showing for them.
No, and it's weird because it's by the offense. Remember, they were down 5-2 against Minnesota State a couple 3 weeks ago or so, and they came back and won 7-6 or something like that. Midgie's a very curious case, and I would say they're going to be more of a dangerous team if they do win the CCHA, which at this point, who the hell knows what's going on with that conference? But if they are the team that is, I think Bemidji State is the most dangerous sort of wild card team in a 1-game format because of that showing against North Dakota. When we walked through on the NCAA podcast, which you have not been on for a while. I'm just kidding.
Sorry.
I know you're busy. But what we've talked about is the Bemidji's Fridays have been really good. Saturdays have been literally the opposite side of the seesaw. They've been horrendous. So it's like, what? Like, first of all, why? It's interesting how Bemidji can have such a good show and good game plan, and then somehow it's like the coaches make an adjustment or they don't. One of that happens, and then it's like, okay, nothing's working on the second night. So it's an interesting team in the very interesting conference, to say it that least, when St. Thomas is arguably the more well-rounded team in that conference. And I'm actually going to put my staple in the paper right now that St. Thomas right now is probably the best team in that conference. Right.
Yeah. Which is awesome.
It is awesome. A little bit unexpected, but that's more, it's not a joust against St. Thomas. It's more of a joust on essentially the rest of the conference. Like, what the hell is going on, honestly?
Yep.
But to your point, Bemidji State does have, I still feel like they play a heavier style, but it's not like the heavy, yes, it's the 2-1-2-4 check yet, but they're not trapping as much. They're not, shall we say, just kind of playing what the football gods would say is prevent defense. Sure, there's still some neutral zone 1-2-2, that and this, but it's more so they're getting up the ice. They have scoring ability. It's more of the defense in those sort of like situational type matters isn't as strong as it used to be, just because, I don't know, it's a different team this year. But in that sense, I do think it gives them a little bit of a different look. I'm not sure if it's better or worse just yet, but it's not the same defensively stout. In fact, their goaltending numbers are abhorrent. Their penalty kill is the worst. In fact, I think it's hovering around 62 to 63%. It's really bad. So it's, for whatever reason, a Tom Serratori led squad, which is known to be stingy, is not so stingy. If anything, it's like, whoa, you can score now, because they're winning games like 7-6, 6-5, 4-3. It's not the Bemidji type historical way.
You know who they honestly remind of is actually Duluth. Their transition now from where they've been a strong defensive team and goaltending has generally been okay, or if you're in Duluth case, unbelievable. To Bemidji, where it's like, okay. You want to talk about lack of defense, Nick? Denver and Yale matched up that previous weekend. 14-0 was the aggregate score for the Pioneers. Whoops. Gross. Omaha 2-1 against Augustana the first night, and then 5-2 the second night. That Augustana team, they're a good hockey team. They're good. Yes. They're a fun watch. Of course, the Huskies did play Michigan this weekend. We'll get to that in just a few moments. Off December 1st and 2nd, so let's recap what happened as far as NCHC play. So non-conference action, 3-1 and 5-1 against Lindenwood. The Western Michigan Broncos get a victory. And then also Arizona State and CC matching up. It was an overtime finish for Arizona State and CC the first night, and then 2-0 Sun Devils in night number 2. Good little showing from the Tigers, all things considered. As far as conference play was concerned, we had 2 matchups. Duluth beats Omaha the first night 4-2 before a 1-0. Yeah, before a 1-0 finish for the Mavs in overtime. That one was in Duluth on Saturday. So, like you said, kind of an interesting little series there. 7-5 was the score for North Dakota over Denver the first night. 3-2 Pios in overtime in Denver in night number 2. So they're kind of trading blows back and forth. There is only one team in the NCHC that has been yet to be beaten in conference play heading into the weekend. Let's recap their games. The weekend before, Michigan gets a victory 2-0 against our Huskies on Friday, November 24th. A crowd of basically 4,000 here for this one. 30-27 Huskies were the shot margins. They were outshot 10-8 in the first, but then 12-7 for St. Cloud in the middle frame and 10-10 aside for the 3-period totals. Both teams failing to register a goal on the power play. 0-for-5 for Michigan, St. Cloud 0-for-3 on the man advantage, and pretty poor in the faceoff dot, unfortunately. 22 for 53 for these Huskies. But, where it came down to was third period scoring, 6:40 mark and 16:30. TJ Hughes gets on the board and gets the game winner for the Michigan Wolverines, Nick, and unfortunate for Dominic Bassi, who stops 25 of 27. This was a hockey game where, it was certainly a great game. St. Cloud, unfortunately, just ends up with the goose egg on the board and falls to 8-5 after that Friday night.
This is going to sound like a broken record, but St. Cloud had an opportunity to win on Friday.
Oh, yeah.
And at the end of it, you hear this a lot from coaches, right? Is that we played 57 out of 60 minutes, but that 3-minute stretch that we did play poorly is what cost us the game. This is exactly what happened on Friday. I watched a lot of that game, in fact, since I was gone away from Minnesota for a little bit. But what I'll tell you is, when we talk about when you're pinning your own zone, right? And sometimes you have to have an awareness as a hockey team, right? And I get it. You don't want to ice the puck necessarily, but you want to get the puck out. And sometimes, if the pass is there, if the lane is there, great. But if you're already in a 90-second shift, maybe it's already a minute 45, close to 2 minutes. You're tired. You're mentally tired, right? Sometimes mistakes then compound, right? What led to Michigan breaking the ice was the Huskies being pinned in their own zone for about 90 seconds to 2 minutes. It was turnover after turnover after turnover, failed clear after failed clear. And let's just put it this way, Michigan has a lot of talent that will make you pay for it. And it was disappointing because I really felt like before that little stretch, and I think it was 8 or 9 minutes into the third, it was close to the midway point.
Yep.
They were going back and forth, and you could see the Huskies were upbeat. They were skating fast. They were moving the puck north. They were both teams trading chances back and forth. The ice was wide open, put it that way.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you get one fail clear. Maybe it's, I forget exactly the sequence of events to be specific, but it was, a failed clearing attempt. It was a good pinch coming to the wall from Michigan to hold things in. And then you could just see the Huskies almost panic a little bit. And, it's frustrating because those are the types of things that are, to me, going to be the biggest sort of, suppressants, glass ceilings for this squad against maybe these more high flying skill teams. Remind you, we have not seen North Dakota yet. And that's going to be a very similar type, skill set they're going to go up against. Yeah. So good news, bad news. It's only a 2-0 game.
And really was a 1-goal game. That second goal was
really,
an unfortunate dagger because the Huskies probably, like you said, deserved to at least maybe tie that game and send it to overtime, which the second night, which we'll get to, they did that and probably didn't deserve to.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. Like it's good that this is happening against a non-conference opponent. And I like playing Michigan too, because again, they're a quick strike offense. This is a very similar type strategy that Brad Berry uses with, again, the aforementioned Fighting Hawks. And Denver, not quite maybe as, fast stretch the ice type, breakout / offensive go north. But, this is that quick transition. If this one Michigan thing that do really well is holy hell. If you turn the puck over, they will get an offensive chance really, really quick. They're very good about taking advantage of that. So if anything, it lets you go back on film and say, okay, in these situations, right? End of the game management type stuff, right? It's not always about making the best play. Sometimes it's about understanding the situation, right? We've already failed to clear the puck a couple times. Our breakout passes, they're either, stepping into them or we're just, being a little bit lazy. No, whether it's you float it high in the air, whether you get it off the glass and out, even if that means it costs you an icing, okay, at least, blows the whistle. You get at least maybe 10 to 15 seconds to reset. And sometimes it's not just about resetting you, but also slowing them down a little bit. And sometimes I think there is just some game, maybe some game management, or what we used to say in the press box, a little bit of, what do you call it? I don't know. My brain's dead.
I would say just like, not even puck management, but just kind of like, kind of managing like pace of play a little bit in terms of like, like, are your zone exits clean? Are you making sure that you're hitting first passes? Are you getting pucks out of the zone? Are you transitioning appropriately? Because if you're turning pucks over on your half of center ice when you're trying to transition flow up the ice, and your turnovers are against the grain, especially against a team like Michigan, that's where you're going to pay a little bit. And things slightly favored Michigan, unfortunately, on that Friday night. The Saturday game was a little bit different, Nick. I think if you look statistically at just the overlying box score, you would have been surprised that the Wolverines get out to that 3-0 lead. 4,000 in attendance for that one. The Huskies outshoot Michigan 39-30. I mean, 12-5 in the first, yet you're down 2-0. That goal less than 2 minutes in, and then less than a minute left in the period. Suddenly you're down by 2. 14-13 Wolverines in the second period for shots, and on the power play, Michigan scores a little over halfway through the period. And how about Vieti Miettinen kind of carrying things on his back from his brother Werner? Yeah. His 10th of the season, shorthanded 2 minutes later, I think gave the Huskies a little bit of life to just kind of feel like, okay. We're in a good spot. They outshoot Michigan 13-8 in period number 3. And they end up getting a power play goal a minute in. Tyler Kupka, his fourth from Tyson Gross and Adam Ingram, and they made it a dogfight, pun intended. And finally, they break through with the extra attacker. 9 seconds left in this hockey game. Kupka, his fourth and fifth of the season, he gets the equalizer. Zach Okabe and Tyson Gross tallying assists. Tyson Gross, bit of a coming out party in this one. His first multi-point game as a Husky. Against all odds, this team comes back from 3-0 down. They end up pushing things to a shootout, and it was no mistake. Miettinen and Kupka both with the shootout goals. Some pretty moves, and Dominic Bassi was perfect in the extra frame, so to speak. In overtime, Michigan had the 3-1 edge in shots, but both teams a goal on the power play across 7 total tries with both teams. The Huskies 39 wins, 46 faceoff losses, a lot of whistles in this one. It was very tightly contested back and forth. Dominic Bassi, you can't complain, stopping 27 of 30 that he saw. But Nick, this was a game where you felt like St. Cloud got a little bit rewarded for maybe missing out on the party on Friday night. Statistically much better in this second night. You never want to go down 3-0 because statistics say you're not going to be in a good spot. But everything else underlying was not exactly terrible for this team. And you know what? Gut check time. They found a way. I think if you go back 2 months to the first 4 weeks of the regular season or non-conference, whatever you want to call it, this team would not have done this. This team would not have come back in this hockey game. They did it. This Michigan team is a good team. Granted, they're kind of the Big 10 is the same as the NCHC teams are kind of beating up on each other. It was a great test. Huskies get a week off after that to kind of regroup. But what an exciting hockey game if you attended the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center across Thanksgiving weekend.
Yeah, and Michigan, for as much, and rightfully deserved accolades that they get for their offense, defensively, they're sort of hit and miss with their defense. They're not, shall I say, the most Loctite defensive group, just because of the way that they play. Again, all 5 guys will be involved in the offense. Their defense love to carry the puck. They can skate like a bat out of hell too. All of their players, both forwards and D, which does, I think, at times leave them a bit of exposed. But to your point, right, this is a very good hockey team. In fact, it's a top 10 team, right? If I recall, or top 15, one of the two. Certainly one of the better teams in college hockey. And you're down 3-0. Now, to your point, right, this team, beginning part of the season, would have been DOA, would have been dead on arrival, right, if you're down 3-0. If there's one thing about Brett Larson's coached squads, if there's one thing that he preaches, is that it's not over. And if there's one thing, if you go down early, you got plenty of time to get your butt back in the game, right? And they found a way, right? You get a spark. And again, Brett Larson, my gosh, yeah, I'm showing how tired I am. His shorthanded aggressiveness at times where he's, shows you taking the shackles off, to be aggressive in situations you're down. It pays dividends here, right? And sometimes, no one, as former players ourselves, it's sometimes you'll take however it goes in, but sometimes when you feel like you're playing the right way, and whether the puck, you're not just getting a bounce, maybe the goaltender is just making the saves, you're like, there's no way he just made that one. It does wear on your confidence and your mentality, right? And sometimes when you see that puck go in the first time, all of a sudden it's like, all right, the swagger's back, the confidence back. And sometimes it just takes that one bounce, and then it's like, okay, here we go, right? And then you can continue to roll and go from there. I feel like that's exactly what the Huskies did on Saturday. And to your point, to take granted it's a shootout, technically an NCAA tie, But to be able to come back from that and to get that shootout win, huge for the program, especially coming into what's now another bye week. And then now right back to NCHC play. And let's just say the next opponent for the Huskies is going to be a tough one.
Yeah, great parity equivalent, too, if you're looking Big 10, NCHC, obviously, as well. As you mentioned, the Huskies moving to 14 in the pairwise as far as the polls. They entered the weekend at 17. Of course, this is coming after their games against Michigan. The Huskies were off this past week. We mentioned improving to 8-5-1 overall. They're 6-0 in conference play. Their first overtime victory, quote unquote, even though, like you said, officially a tie. Scoring first continues to be a premium for both Huskies teams. 5-2 in 1-goal contest now for this men's squad, starting to really pick things up. I believe they were 1-2 or 0-2 to start the season. So you talk about the progression that they've had. They are +6 in terms of goal differential. They have actually outshot their opponents somewhat heavily. It's like 75 or 80, somewhere around there would be the quick mental math. And again, scoring first or at least being tied, giving them a chance heading into period number 2, respectively. Vieti Miettinen paces the group 14 points in the season, 10 goals for him, the first player to get even close to that double-digit mark. The next one is Joey Molinar with 7. Adam Ingram, 12 points. You talked about how he had to have a breakout sophomore year. He certainly has. Dylan Anhorn, same point tally, and Kyler Kupka with 11 on the season. This team, as you mentioned, a tough test. They head to Baxter Arena this upcoming weekend against the Omaha Mavs, and trying to take care of business before they too are off for a couple of weeks, 1 week less than the women's team. They'll have a home visiting Bemidji State on Friday the 29th, and then on the Sunday the 31st, they're back at home against the Beavers before week off. And then conference play resumes. So yeah, last NCHC action, last quote unquote first half before the holidays. They play Omaha, who has been a stingy team, has given a lot of groups fits here, Nick. Potential movement if you're looking at NCHC standings here. This Omaha team is actually on the outside looking in as far as the playoff seedings. They're currently in 5th right now. They've got 7 points. They're 1 point ahead of CC, who has 6. Duluth at 4 points in the 7th spot. Who would have predicted that?
We did.
and about the only thing we've gotten right so far. Miami, of course, has yet to garner a point. Western Michigan occupies the last home spot at 10 points in 4th. Denver right ahead of them at 11. That Pios team has been a little bit shaky up and down to start the season. Omaha, like I said, is a team that we kind of felt like would maybe be right up there with Western Michigan, and then North Dakota. Okay, 5-1, actually saving the Huskies from having a team deadlock with them. Omaha does get that lone victory in overtime against the Fighting Hawks. They're at 16 points. The Huskies remain unbeaten, 18 points across 6 total contests. Will that change, or will they enter the holiday break yet to lose in conference play? Nick, this Omaha team has always been a challenge.
It has. And, it's one thing to hold your hat to beat North Dakota. Number one, that is not an easy team to beat.
And they've done it historically.
They have
that team. Yeah.
They have. The Omaha just has a way to suffocate skilled teams. Again, you talk about teams that we've lamented in the past about blue collar style and, that really make you earn every inch of ice. That is Omaha to a T. And the one thing that they counter with is that, they can, they're almost like the rich man's version of Bemidji, where, they kind of, ground and pound it, but they also have the skill and the speed to create offense and to capitalize on that. What was it? Was it a year or two ago where it was in Omaha where the Huskies, needed a couple of wins, and I think they got either swept or
they had a bunch of duds. It was like 5-2 or something like that.
Omaha. Yeah, and St. Cloud did not look good at all in those games. Omaha really took control from essentially the opening puck drop in both of those games, and it was a killer for the Huskies in terms of, I think, trying to get into, I believe, a home ice position for the NCHC, if I remember the story correctly.
I think it was 2 years ago, and they ended up losing to Quinnipiac.
That's right.
In the opening round of the NCAAs.
Yep, that sounds right.
They kind of limped into the playoffs, basically.
That's right. And that's where Horenick, actually was starting to get he was getting injured. Yeah.
Yep.
So at the end of it, Omaha, they can do it, right? I think one of the surprises that has caught our eyes, at least from Omaha this year, is, they're a team that when we talk about their blue collar style, AKA this and that, I thought they would score more, honestly. Yeah. And they haven't. Here's the funny part, though. They score more than the Huskies.
Yeah. Well, and they're you talked about Bemidji State, for example. They're kind of, acclimating to that MO again, where it seemed like in years past their games were tight scoring, but it was 5-4, 4-3. Now they're starting to have a little bit of Bemidji State, former CC Tigers in them, where it's like their games are 3-2, 2-1, 3-1. They're a little bit more low scoring if they want to have a chance to win. Or how about 1-0 in overtime against a top 5 team in the country right now? Right.
And, it's interesting because when first of all, you can hold North Dakota off the board at all. That's no easy feat to say with all the talent they have up front. But I do feel like for St. Cloud, right, especially a team that loves to carry the puck in the zone with possession, I feel like that at times got them in trouble against Michigan, where Michigan was clearly stacking at the blue line. And it was clear that, they needed to hit the line with speed, soft little chip, or make sure you rim it around and be on your horse and make sure you get there first, or at least, contest, in a puck battle to get it back. Omaha's going to kind of do the same thing, right? They're very much a stand up with the blue line, force the team coming at you to sort of give it up and have to get it back. And for St. Cloud, I think that is going to have to embrace the physical battle. I think that's the big thing on both ends of the ice. It's going to be a ground and pound type game. If they can embrace that. Now, granted, there are guys on the Huskies like a Grant Sean. Oh, geez, the last name is Sean. That isn't a little bit feisty. You would have thought. I love it, though, because, it's that type of game they're going to have to play. Now, I'm not saying change how you play completely, because that's not St. Cloud hockey, but understand you're going to have to be prepared for more body contact, and to know that, this game is really going to be won in the trenches, along the boards, in front of the net. Yep. It's going to be ugly goals. There's going to be greasy goals. And if they want it to be an open, freewheeling style of game, it's not going to go well for St. Cloud. It's going to be a tough test. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting test as well, too. The fact that I just said North Dakota was also a top 5 team in the country made me cringe in so many different ways. But nonetheless, this Omaha squad is coming off a victory against them, the only team to beat them in conference play so far this season. It took overtime to do it. Let's see if the Huskies can take care of business against the Mavs in regulation. Men's team, of course, Friday, Saturday playing against these Mavericks to cap off the first half of their season. Women's team in action on Tuesday, the 5th, against the Gophers at home before hosting Minnesota Duluth. 3 really great games on the women's side upcoming over the course of the weekend, Nick. So get out to the Herb Brooks National Hockey Center. You'll be in attendance for the women's games. Should be some fun things to kind of recap. And then who knows, we'll try to figure out some plans. We'll be recapping scores, but I feel like Brian Idolski would be hopefully on the docket. I don't know. Brett Larson, depending on his schedule, it's kind of hit or miss. That you'd like to give the man a little bit of Christmas time off. I feel like it's always hard to bug him around Christmas time, and he's been very good with us. It's been no issue, but I mean, the guy gets like 2 off days during the whole season. Yeah. And I think that's the part that people forget too. Like, it just because the team's on holiday break, no, they're out recruiting. This is a huge recruiting time is the holiday break, where, the head coach really isn't getting, a touch. This is a time where he is really starting to look at, names that they do want to go after. These are huge meeting times, and obviously reviewing film, because every other team is doing the same thing, right? You're trying to look and build for the future. You're also looking at your current season, trying to figure, okay, what are we doing well? What do we want to improve on? So it never ends. And even then, we've talked to Brett before, right? When he was on our show, was it May of this last year, I believe? Yeah, maybe closer to the middle of the summer, but yeah. And essentially, the end of the season, again, out recruiting, out doing this. And then there's college hockey coaches meetings that are done in Naples. That's a tough place to go. Darn. I know, right? And then constant travel. I think he gets maybe a couple of weeks where he can really relax and sort of rest. But beyond that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of downtime for these coaches. So anytime that they can get one there, they take advantage of it. I mean, does Brett Larson strike you as the type of guy that does relax in general anyway? Although, if there's a golf course nearby, maybe you might get him. Yeah. But it's kind of funny because
I would be very curious to hear what his take would be on the season, because, I think he was a little more subdued knowing what he had in his group than we were opening up the year. But I feel like he probably is maybe now in the same spot of Brian Idolski, where it's like they're okay with how things are going, but they feel like they could pull even more. The phrase that I think I would always maybe exemplify for this year for both squads right now is never satisfied, right? I think there's so much more that you can pull from each of these squads. I think both of the coaches would attest to it, and who knows, maybe we'll work on trying to get one or both of them on the show. But as we mentioned, Gophers, Duluth for the women's side to cap off the first half of the season, and then the men, of course, play a very difficult test in Omaha to round off their first half of the season. They'll have Bemidji State coming out of the holiday break. Women will have a little bit longer to wait into the month of January. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the Den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Perlix!
Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.